to the cloud.
Stephen,
Okay.
can you give me the ability to screen share?
I'm going to make you a co-host.
Cool. And while I talk, are you able to just keep an eye on the chat? And you can just be the point to interrupt
if
it.
people have questions, I'll let you know. So
cool.
We have quite a few joinees, so welcome everyone.
Yeah. I've not been on the calls routinely in a while. If anybody's new that doesn't know me, my name is Robert. I'm one of the project administrators. I've been part of the community now for, I think, over 5 years at this point. My day job is a nurse. I'm a travel nurse, currently on the way to Tacoma, Washington, up in Brady's area. And the goal is for me to transition from the bedside as a nurse to working effectively on OpenEMR as a full-time profession. So yeah, it's a little bit about me. Before I was a nurse, I was in software development and then changed my whole thing for a while. And now I want to marry the health IT side and the nursing side. So it's a little bit about who I am. And I still cannot screen share, Stephen.
Oh, I made you a co-host.
Oh, wait, I'm on here. So I called in.
Oh, so let's see. Which one am I going to
pick the other?
Let's see.
Pick the one that's not talking right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Right now.
Success. Let's do this. All right.
There we go.
Although I don't want just that window, I might as well just, well, yeah, we'll stick with the window for now. Events, if anybody's super familiar with JavaScript, there's this idea in JavaScript is known as the event loop, and it's basically the life cycle of an action in JavaScript. And there's some similarities between the event cycle in JavaScript and events in PHP or any other language. Events in dispatching and event-driven architecture is not specific to PHP. It's just it's a paradigm where in like a fully implemented event-driven architecture, every action that occurs from the time the server gets the request to render a page to the actual rendering of the page or JSON or your REST API, whatever it may be, is just a series of events. And what I mean by that is you've got this little core process that just says, I have a request coming in, I'm going to fire off and announce to my event dispatcher that I have a request. And then I'm going to go maybe process that request. And I'm going to announce that, hey, I'm about to process the request. And then they go do the work. And then now the request has been processed, and I'm going to announce again, I have processed the request, and I'm going to send it back to the client. And then there could even be an event afterwards, after you actually send the data back to the browser, and the little core file could basically announce, I have sent the data back to the client. We are done. We have concluded this cycle. That's really what the life cycle of a web request is. The browser says, I would like some data. The backend does something about it, and then returns a response. And every step of the way, the core mechanism, whatever that may be, steps through a series of things. If you think about it in OpenEMR, we go directly to, in many cases, a very specific page in the system. But we do have a few controllers in place. And that means that I can't think of one off the top of my head that uses it. There's not a whole lot, but it points to the index page, and the index page goes and fetches the correct controller. The controllers know what to do with that request, and they go find a service and call the service, and that makes a database call, provides the data back to the controller, and the controller renders out some HTML and returns the request. And all of those steps can have events. They're all events, basically, something that's happening. And so you have this idea where if everybody can know that an event is taking place, you have the ability to inject your own functionality into that workflow. And I feel like this is all very pie in the sky. So let me, I know Stephen was looking at some stuff. Let's find one. And for the sake of simplicity, because that whole spiel is not simple, I'm going to look at the facility created event. And I want that. And I want that one. Just looking for a very specific if I had gotten here on time, I would have had all of this opened up, ready to go. I had it yesterday, ready to go. All right. So when you go to, and I am gonna reshare my screen so you can see all of it. When you go to the facility page, we are actually calling here this form. So we're actually hitting this exact page, the facilities page. And you can add your facility, put in your data here. And the minute you hit save, if we look at this form, you're going to see that we're calling the submit form, and it's going to this is real-time debugging here when
Facilities
you don't
underscore add. No.
There it is. Thank you. Yep. Okay. So when you hit that save button, you're actually hitting this page. And this page is going to do a bunch of stuff and process, and all the JavaScript and HTML is down here. But if you look up here, you're going to find that this, we're calling here the facility service. And down in the page, you're going to call facility insert. And I know that just because I know the code base. And I know that that's where we've decided to put the save function. And so we come in here to our service, and this is the insert. So this is what's literally getting called to put the facility data into the database. And it's going to process some stuff and get all the way down to, where is it?
It's gonna be line 229.
Sorry.
If you search for dispatch, that's where everything.
You're right. Sorry. What happens when you run late? You try to take shortcuts. So it actually calls insert facility, which is getting, I don't know what this function is, so we're going to hide that. So this is what we're calling, right? We go get the data, we parse it, we prep our SQL and actually inject it into the database, and then we want to return the data and then the facility ID. You can see that's what we're doing right here. We're just taking the data that we were handed. We've got the facility ID from the database, and we're going to build a new array, and we're going to create a new facility created event. And that event looks like this. There's not a whole lot to this class. There's an event handle, which is just a naming convention, and then a constructor that just sets a method to the data. Not a whole lot going on there. And then just two functions, a getter and a setter. And what this allows you to do is, if you follow this map through, you've got incoming facility data into the class. You can get it, and then you can set it, which all very straightforward. If we come back to facility service, we take that event, we call our event dispatcher, which is kind of the central location that knows about the various events and when things are going and when things should go. It's just a centrally located place to fire off our events. And it is available in the globals command. You see all we did here was call globals, and it sits in the kernel array. And it returns an event dispatcher object. If we call dispatch, we pass in the event that we just created, including the event handle. So basically what we're actually firing off, what just happened. In this case, the facility was created, and then the data, and then I think this is a priority. Yeah. Basically what this line is doing is just saying, it's announcing to the dispatcher, it's like getting on the radio and saying, hey, I just saved a facility. I'm making the announcement. Here's the data that I saved. Anybody that needs to do anything with that data, here it is. And on the other side of dispatching is listening. And you could have a module that listens for this event. You don't care how this event gets created. You don't care when it gets created or who creates it. All you care about is, I need to know when a facility gets added to the database. And when it does that, I need to fire off some custom code that does anything. That maybe it immediately goes in and modifies the database and updates the facility. Doesn't matter what it does. All you need to know is this answers the question. This one line right here answers the question, answers the question or answers the problem. When did a facility get created? And it happens at this point in time. When you write a custom module, you can subscribe to the event dispatcher and you can say, cool, I want to know when that happens. Then you can inject your code. I'm going to show, I'm going to use, Stephen, your,
my repo.
Yeah, I forked it.
It's always nice when people use my code. There we go.
This is not the best way to navigate GitHub, but it'll work. I don't want to step on Stephen's toes too much because I know next week we're talking about modules, but if you needed to listen to that event in your custom code, you would follow a particular convention that Stephen will get into, but basically in this file, in this OpenEMR.bootstrap file, you will fire off what you need to happen. And in this case, we're going to instantiate a bootstrap class, pass in an event dispatcher, which again is globally available for anybody who needs it, and then subscribe to some events. And I want to show you what subscribing to the event looks like, because we know we have this really simple way, right, to dispatch that something has happened. And then well, that doesn't do us any good if nobody knows that an event has been dispatched. So what does that look like? Well,
is there any way around? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Yep. So if I need to know when this happens, in the case of this mock custom module that Stephen has written out, he basically calls this one function that subscribe to events, and it does a few different subscriptions. And I don't have a facilities one in here, but we'll look at the add global item.
That one doesn't.
Come down.
It's the add.
That one doesn't do anything.
Yeah, register menu items that you want.
We'll do register new item, fine. I do like that GitHub can do this kind of IntelliSense thing now. It's kind of cool. In this function, we call, if you'll notice, if you come up to our constructor, this class gets past that event dispatcher. It's the same event dispatcher that exists in the global array. And this function calls the event dispatcher, and instead of over here, I can even make this a little bigger too. There we go. Here we get the event dispatcher and we dispatch. Here we get the dispatcher and we're going to add a listener. It can also be called subscribing. I see that a lot in certain frameworks. You subscribe to events or you listen to them. They both do. It's the same thought process. And here you're telling the event dispatcher, hey, I want to listen for this particular event. And when that happens, please execute, please do this. And in this context, what we're executing here is going to be this class, and we're going to call the add custom module menu item function, which is just below it. And here's where we can do some stuff.
If I just will interject there, Robert, it takes any kind of callback. So that's
right.
the PHP syntax for a callback.
So in this very specific method, Stephen chose to do it this way. You could put an anonymous function in. You could pass it static classes. Any callable that's valid in PHP could be called here. And so at this point, you've said, hey, whenever a menu is updated, please fire off this class and this function. And just to complete the loop, that function is handed back the menu event, which I know we're kind of jumping between facilities and menus, so let's
it's called menu. There we go.
So I don't like jumping between two different events, so we'll look at this instead of the facilities. This menu event has a couple different triggers. You could update it, you could restrict it. But again, there's not a whole lot happening in this class. You instantiate it and hand it an array, which is going to be the menu list. You can get the menu or you can set the menu. That's it. That's all you do. And I guess I should have explained this at the top. The power of events and running an event-based architecture is that each event takes the previous event data, manipulates it, and passes it down the chain. And that's really what you're doing. You're building a tool chain to modify the request. So you start with this list of menus, and then you just start firing off these events. And so, Stephen, do you know where the menu event gets dispatched from?
It's because I don't like the architecture, but let me pull it out. What I like about PHP Storm, I think that Visual Studio Code has it too, is that you can right click on an event and you can say find usages. And that will tell you, that's a really handy way of saying, where can I use this place?
Yeah, let me.
That is used.
It exists. Like, give me a second.
It's in main menu role in the Git menu. And this is where all the menus are being built and created inside of. So the file is called main menu role.php.
Okay.
This is where all the menus are being built inside of OpenEMR.
There's that and the menu event. FYI, just as a quick side note, I'm running a Docker installation. That's how I do my development. And Visual Studio Code allows you to attach to running Dockers. And so the IDE now, I'm sitting in my Docker environment. So I can leverage all of my PHP IntelliSense. So if there's any Visual Studio Code developers that have always run into issues trying to use Docker, we can chat later. I've only started doing this in the last 6 weeks or so, and it's really been helpful. I get my IntelliType and my my real-time linting and stuff. Let's see, I think, find all references. We can do it too.
Yeah.
I mean, all that to say, you found it faster than I did, but when you come down here to
line 66.
Thank you. When we dispatch this event, okay, we hand it menu parsed. So this is the actual function that's doing something with the menus, and that's one of the instances here. And I just have an array, and I hand the dispatcher this menu event. When the dispatcher, I'm not going to pull up the dispatch code. I mean, I can. It's a bit complicated.
I don't know that we need to dive into it.
No, it gets complex. Basically, the dispatcher knows 10 classes have subscribed to this particular event. And so when it goes down that list of 10 functions to to call. And this custom module would be just one in a list of items that want to access the menu. The dispatcher hands this function the menu event. And this function, if we come down to the bottom, returns the event. The next function, whatever it is down the line, so, you know, say this is Steven's custom module that needed it. Well, say I have my own module that needs it. I'm going to get handed the updated event, and I'm expected to return the updated event. And it just cascades right down this tool chain so that you can, it doesn't matter where, I mean, it can matter, but effectively, it doesn't matter where you sit in the chain. You know you're going to be handed this event, you know what it looks like, you know how to manipulate it, and you know how to push it back to the dispatcher in a structured way. And that, I should have spent more time on that up front. That is the power of using event dispatch, event-driven architecture. You've abstracted out the workflow basically. And so my custom module, like, it doesn't matter what I do or how I do it. All I have to do is ensure that I can ingest one clearly defined structured class and return it. And that's all I do. When the dispatcher, kind of the train conductor, the orchestra person, the dispatcher is calling this function. When it gets handed back that return event, it's going to call the next one and pass it right back in. So this event is just whatever the last event was. Whoever modified the last one, just, I get this. And I don't know, Stephen, do you feel like I'm being clear about that? Because this is where,
and I'm familiar with the topic. Is there any, I mean, is this confusing to anyone? Do they have any questions about what we've been talking about at this point?
everybody's
I
asleep.
haven't seen
Perfect.
anything in the chat, so
Okay. I put everybody to sleep. It's all good.
yeah. I mean, I would just add that I mean, similar to JavaScript events and how events bubble, but these events don't bubble up and down the DOM. These are passed sequentially. It's most similar to kind of a Unix pipe, if you've ever used the pipe command on Unix.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yep.
the pipe and filters design pattern. So you're passing data from one piece to the next piece to the next piece. And each step along the line is modifying it until you get to the last person. And that's this particular, the menu is a pipes and filters design pattern. Whereas some of the other events, like the facility event, you're not modifying anything. You're just saying, you know, you now have an opportunity to be notified and do something. But, you know, you're being called, now you can respond. So I just throw that.
I think,
out there.
yeah, that's a good explanation. Yeah, I like that. And I think maybe it'll even clear it up a little bit. If we look at what this function does, we create a new menu item that we want to inject, and we want to call it custom module skeleton. That's what we want the user to be able to click on, and it's going to follow this URL or whatever. And we come down and do a bunch of other stuff that Stephen will talk about next week. But this function right here is where, or block of code, I think, is what is powerful. This function loops over that menu that it was handed up as a parameter, and it does some checking. And if effectively what this does is it pushes the menu item that we want to inject, the link that we want to put in, into a very particular top level menu item. So it puts it in item. Yeah, it does. It puts it oh, right here. Yeah, sorry, I'm clicking into the thing. It puts it right here. Yep, it would show up here. That's what that function does. And it does so because it knows it's got this all of this structure that drives this menu gets passed into it. This is the key for the modules menu, and then it just appends a new item. the key element here is that it takes this nice new modified menu array, which is just sitting right here. No, menu sitting up here. Gets the menu. So we have access to the event, get the menu. So now I know what it exists. I've modified it. In this case, we've added to it. And now I'm pushing it back with the set method. And now I hand it off. What's a little bit of a thought exercise. If the next function down the chain, say I know Steven's injecting this custom module, right? But I don't like it. And my custom module doesn't want this to be shown. When I get, if I'm next in line, I'll get the modified event, the modified menu, and I can basically search and do the same thing here. And now this menu item will show up, and I could theoretically unset it, push it back into the menu, and now it'll never show up. Or I can basically build on top of his and say, if this module, if this menu item exists, cool, I'm going to expand on it and maybe add a contextual menu, whatever I may do.
Kind of like restrict the access permission. If you had some kind of permission checker module and you wanted to add permissions to the system or specific permissions, then you could have it where you remove menu items based on the permissions that people have set.
There is, so this is, like Stephen was saying, the pipe and filter pattern, basically. There's notification type patterns where the facilities one, like Stephen was saying, is just a, hey, this thing happened. I think a use case for that would be maybe your custom module is doing some outside, maybe it fires off a REST call that, I don't know, updates an LDAP directory or active services directory or active directory, whatever, something off of OpenEMR. You just need to know that this thing happened, you know, or fire off an email or something. I think there was a question, we were talking about the UI. There are events that sit up top. You're right, Stephen. There's an event that sits here, renders all of this, and then there's another event down here that you could hook into and add to or remove. I don't think that's necessarily the best mechanism to do it. I would rather there be a single event here, and then each of these cards injects into this event its own information. That's a super heavy lift because you're changing a lot of the code. But instead of having, if you looked under the hood at this patient summary screen, it's a lot to build this page. It's very monolithic. It's very hard to update. In the last couple of months, I've done a lot of refactoring on this page, and it's tough work because everything is so tightly integrated. Whereas if this page was fully event driven, the ability to add or remove any kind of card here becomes much less complicated. The barrier to entry is much smaller. The footprint that you have to do is a lot smaller. There's a lot, we've got a handful of events. My guess is that over time, there will be events continuing to be built out. I think Stephen made a good point. Like we're not opposed to putting events where people need them. And the process of doing that is really pretty straightforward. And I would recommend following, you know, the menu example or the facilities example. The one thing I did note as I was prepping for this is, Stephen, we just do need to move to contracts. But I don't think that's going to break the workflow. I haven't looked though, but because it was deprecated in what, 4.3. So
yeah, we'll need to update what the interface is for it, but that's all right.
Hopefully that's not a tough fix.
No, it won't be. So the class names will stay the same. It's just
yeah.
Yeah.
To if you needed an event in some part of the code that doesn't exist, to do it is not hard. You will want to create a class that extends our event dispatcher. We did not write the event dispatcher. I don't want to write an event dispatcher ever. People far smarter than me did, and I like to leverage what they did. So off of the Symphony project, which used to be a very monolithic project like Zend, is now highly modular. In fact, they may have started modular, but they built a component that is an event dispatcher, and it does the job very well. That's what we leverage and what we use. So you'll just want to extend, well, eventually this contract event, but an event, and you basically say like, I'm an event. This is what I do. In this case, menu updates. There's a naming convention. Like, this is not anything set in stone. It's a convention, the kind of the class that's being acted upon and then the action being taken. So in this case, it's a menu, and the action itself is a update or a restrict. And then you just need to get and set whatever you want to modify, you pass into the event, and then you've got to make sure you can publicly get it and publicly set it. That's it. Events are the event action itself is very lightweight. So this is all it's needed to fire an event. And then you need that other line that literally just dispatches it. This line right here. Just get you get the event listener. I'm sorry, you get the event dispatcher and you just dispatch it. So events are not hard to implement. It's just legacy code, unwinding legacy code can take a while. So I hope that clarifies. I feel like I spent a lot of time going over the basics, and hopefully everybody here is super familiar with events and like is more on board now. But you know, if you get stuck somewhere, you can ask now, or if you don't want to ask, you can email me or reach out on the forums. But this whole conversation exists because next week Stephen's going to talk about custom module development, and the way we are doing custom modules is completely based on events. And so if you don't understand events, you're going to struggle to understand how to leverage our custom module framework. And if you're new to event-driven architecture, it's not something you really dealt with before. It does have a steep learning curve. And so once it clicks, it really is a fun way to develop a framework and a code base, because it promotes so much flexibility. I think in Node, I think the Express framework is completely event-driven. I think everything in JavaScript is really, but I think as we incorporate more events and move more of the core into an event structure, we're going to see a lot of growth and a lot more development, because it really opens the door to being able to do a lot more with the code base without having to go in and adapt core. If you're ever about to build a project for a client, or you have this really cool thing that you want to do, use events, because that lowers the footprint and it makes it easier. If you're going to do custom work that you can't push back to the like proprietary work that you can't open source back to the community, I would recommend pushing back the events that you need so that you can leverage it and make your long-term development life easier. Stephen, anything else you think I overlooked or missed or felt we should talk about with events?
No, I often like to ask the question of, or like to think through the question of, okay, so what are my pros, and then are there any cons, right? And I think you listed out quite a bit of the pros. Like, it makes the code less brittle, in that I can tie into something and I can make a change, and I'm not going to mess up anybody but my own installation. You know, if I screw up, it's just me that gets affected, and it's not, you know, the other 100 million users of OpenEMR or anything like that, right? yeah, the nice thing is that I can go in and I can insert, and I can even have it turned on or off based upon where the module is or a global flag or anything like that. I will mention the downside is that if you're going to be doing heavy development, like making lots of changes, you want to tie into much bigger events than smaller events. If you tie into a lot of like tiny little events that are scattered all across the system, you may find that you'll get into a project and you'll start going good, and maybe you're a couple weeks into building something. And then after about a month or two, you're like, I can't figure out how my code even works. Because you've tied into so many small events that it's hard to reason about your code. It's hard to debug it. It's hard to figure out what's going on.
That's a good point.
So there's a con there in that if you aren't familiar with the events or the order of how the events are being fired, it can make it challenging to debug. And over time, we'll build better debugging tools. Symfony has a pretty good console project for debugging events that shows you kind of the events and all the data architecture as it passes through. We don't have that in the system just yet. And then the other thing that I would mention is that we're gonna push, if you try to get an event in the system, we're gonna try and push you to make it as generic as possible. Because an event is essentially an API. It's a contract. It's a contract that OpenEMR is making with you as the event developer, the module writers and the event people. And we're making a contract saying, here's our API. Here's what we're going to try and conform to. And so our goal is to not change that too much. Otherwise it breaks code. So we're going to try and make those events as generic and as general purpose as possible. And so as you do pull requests, you say, I need this, I'm doing this development, I want to add this into the system. Try to think about more than just your project. Try to think, how would other people use this? How can I make this generic? That you're going to have an easier time in your pull requests that way, rather than us, pushing back and forth, and you're like, well, this is too much work, I'm not even going to do it anymore, right? So
I would agree.
Some thoughts that I would say there.
I think to expand on a little bit of what you said about how very quickly it can become confusing to debug your stuff. If you're not really familiar with the event-driven architecture idea and the implementation, the upfront investment is pretty high. But like I said earlier, once it clicks, the benefit to using it is big. But it does create complexity because it's a different way of thinking than what a lot of the legacy code base here has.
So I think we should, we're probably near the top of the hour, but I think we should open it up. I had one question about kind of how to improve kind of our architectural background in PHP, but I didn't have any other questions about events in specific. I'd like to open that up. We can talk a little bit after maybe we get some questions about events, but maybe how to improve our PHP architecture in a little bit. But I think that we should open it up if people have questions about what Robert's talked about or what I've talked about. Any questions about events or events in the system?
I see in the chat somebody said that this is their first time hearing about event-driven architecture. I would recommend reading up on it a little bit and maybe watching a couple of maybe YouTube videos. I don't have a recommendation off the top of my head, but sometimes those YouTube videos get even more convoluted than what I did. But I would spend some more time reading on it and studying how it's implemented, just looking over the code and trying to follow the path, follow the request path through the software. And that's what I what I did when I was first learning. I'd say, okay, well, I know it starts at index.php. And I would just sit there and follow and try to go through all of the classes. And finally, I would figure out and see, okay, there's the events, and just follow it through. And I mean, I'm a big proponent of reading the code of established projects as a way to understand how something works, because that's an easier way than trying to like muddle through it as you write.
Yeah. I would recommend, if you're looking for books, if you want to do books, so the Gang of Four, the kind of the seminal design patterns book, has the observer design pattern, which all of this is being based off of. So that's a good introductory thing. Look, if you do any kind of, I like also Martin's book on enterprise design patterns, which is where,
oh yeah, that's a good one.
OpenEMR is a enterprise project, but they talk through the pipes and filters event pattern, as well as the pub sub. So if you've heard of pub sub, I mean, there's all kinds of places out there, but they use what's called the mediator design pattern, which is what Symphony's event dispatcher is based upon, and which all is based upon the observer design pattern from the Gang of Four. But if you want to learn more about kind of event-driven architecture, if you're reading through and you go and you Google and you YouTube and the event stuff's not clicking, doing a Google on mediator design patterns and pub sub design patterns will give you a lot of resources that you can read up on. I would also recommend just you can Google and YouTube on PHP design patterns if you want to see how these are implemented inside of PHP. And then how I cut my teeth on a lot of this stuff as far as PHP goes is I go and look at the Symphony. They've got a lot of really smart people, the Symphony code base, and you'll see these design patterns all through everything. They did a really nice job, much better than Zen and some of the others, in my opinion. But CodeIgniter and some of the other frameworks, they did a really good job on their design pattern and implementation. It is a steep learning curve because it's design patterns everywhere. But if you want to become like a really top-notch PHP developer, reading that code is a really good teeth-cutting exercise. I
put a link to our Amazon Smile page for the patterns for enterprise architecture by Martin Fowler. I forgot about that book. I haven't read it in years. Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a really good one, and refactoring is a good one if you're wanting to figure out how to do that inside of OpenEMR. He has another book called Refactoring, which is
here. I'm going to paste that into. Yeah, there you go. The second one is refactoring.
Yeah. Any other kind of questions or thoughts from people? I'm glad we had so many show up. I'm hoping that you'll all join us next week and come with questions.